JavaScript HTML DOM manipulation 2. Welcome. The learning objectives for today are that the student has acquired the skills needed to select and apply key principles, technologies and methods to the programming of complex digital user interfaces. This means that you should be able to select, different programming strategies depending on what the purpose is of the code and what the circumstances are. Go to Canvas and download the zip file from today's lecture, which is JavaScript HTML DOM manipulation 2. Unpack it somewhere. You'll want to keep the files. There are two folders inside of the main folder. Open the dark mode folder first. You can drag both folders into Visual Studio Code to begin with if you want to, but it's dark mode first. Open index.html from dark mode and in a browser, and open index.html and script.js in the editor. You have opened the folder in Visual Studio Code, and let's go to the dark mode folder, and inside of that you'll see an index.html. Let's open that in a browser, and as you can see, it is the assignment that you had earlier for the exam, I think it was, where you needed to construct this web page based on a markup. And what we've got here is we've got basically the web page as it should be, and then we've got two buttons added. We've got one called toggle dark mode, which for now does nothing but jump to the top of the page because it has a hashtag as a reference, href, which means that it will jump to the top of the page if clicked. The same for toggle button color, that's just jumping to the top of the page as well. You can see the two buttons are actually anchor tags, a tags, and they've got href hashtag, and there are classes assigned to them, and they have an ID each. One is button mode and one is button color. Okay, so let's go and watch the code itself here. Yeah. So what I'm planning to do here is to create a dark mode which adds a style sheet to our head, so that we have let's find that style sheet. Let's go to assets. I've got style CSS, which is the usual one, and I'm using some CSS variables to let the different values propagate down through the code. You can see this really quickly here if I look at frappe.css, which is my own framework that I built. Just a small one to make it easy and fast for me to do these small assignments for you. You can see we have the root pseudo class, and inside of that I'm creating some different variables which have different values. Some of them are, this is view width for instance. It's a basic density spacer, which means that it's like one I use for paddings and margins and stuff. And then I have multipliers for it. I have the default, and then I have a medium, a large and an extra large. And when it's medium, I times the default by 2. When it's large, I times it by 3. When it's extra large, I times it by 6. And you can see an example for that down here. Radius component medium. I do a calculation where I get the variable value of frappe radius component root times by variable of the variable value of frappe density multiplier medium, for instance. And that's the medium one. The large one is times the multiplier for large instead. So that's how that works. And I use the same for colors and stuff like that. And the colors are interesting because we are going to use those colors as a way of changing all of the colors for the dark mode. You don't have to use variables to do this. You can just add another style sheet if you want to that doesn't use variables. But let's see what I'm doing here. I'm running this frappe style sheet, and I'm running this style sheet. And what I want to do is when I activate dark mode, I add this style sheet to it. So dark mode CSS will be active as well. And as you can see, I've just changed a few things here. I'm changing the basic colors in the color variables, and I am changing the font color on the body tag, and I am changing something in the input because that needs to be changed, where you can type your email address, the sign up for our newsletter thing. So that's what I'm doing with this dark mode thing. But basically, I am just attaching this style sheet, dark mode CSS, to the head of the document after the other style sheets. So it will be, taken into consideration as the last one. And how do I do this in JavaScript? Well, let's see. I'm gonna create a function that I can attach to the button, to the toggle dark mode button. And that function I am going to call darkModeToggle. And let's see, what do I need to make this happen? Well, I can I want to do a check to see if is the style sheet there already. If it is, then I want to remove it. If it's not, then I want to add it, right? So if the dark mode style sheet is there, I'm adding one. If it's already there, I will be removing the one that's there. Okay. And to do this, I am going to create a function called darkModeCssIsPresent. And I don't have that right now, but let's do that. So function darkMode CSS is present. That's a long function name. I am very aware of that, but it is exactly what I wanted to do. So I'll keep that name in. And first of all, I'm going to use a trick where I add an ID to the CSS link in head. Let's go back to the index here. As you can see, the different link files for the CSS files, link tags for the CSS files. They don't have an ID, but you can say ID is equal to prepay CSS if you wanted to. So you can have an ID on them, and then you can find that specific element by looking for the ID. So let's try that out here. What I want to do is, when I add the dark mode CSS, I'm gonna add an ID to it called dark mode CSS link. So I will start out looking for that link. But first of all, I am going to create a boolean, which allows me to check if I have already found that link. I'm creating the boolean and I'm setting it to false because that's the default. If I don't find anything, then the results should be false. So I am initializing the boolean with a false, and then I am looking for my CSS link in head. I'm calling it dark CSS link. That's my variable name that I'm creating here. And I'm going to look for document query selector, and the selector I'm looking for is dark mode CSS link. So I will be giving my link to the dark mode CSS this ID when I inject it into the code, so that I can find it again when I want to remove it, if I want to remove it. Okay, so how can we check if this element exists in the code? Well, there's a pretty simple way of doing that in JavaScript. If we just say if dark CSS link, then it will return true or false based on whether the element exists or not inside of the HTML DOM. So if it doesn't exist, if there is no element found with this ID, then this sentence will act as a false. If it is found, then it will act as a true. So if it's found, if it's true, then we can set our found variable, the boolean up here, we'll set that to true, which means, hey, we actually found the style sheet in the DOM. And well, since it was false to begin with, found equals false. That's our default. We leave it at that, and then we check if the element is present. If the element is present, then we'll set it to true. And now all we need to do is to return the found variable. This means that when I call the darkModeCssIsPresent function, I will get a true or false value back. I'll get a true value if the CSS with this ID is in the HTML DOM. I'll get a false value if it is not. So we can use that up here in darkModeToggle to figure out if we want to add dark mode or we want to remove dark mode, right? So we'll use the fact that this is a boolean again, and we can say if not darkModeCssIsPresent, and we need to add those. We need the parentheses. If not darkModeCssIsPresent, well, then we want to add it. We want to add dark mode into head. Let's just make a note of that. Add darkModeCSS to head. If it's not present, then we want to remove it. This is how I usually write code. I write some notes about what I want to do in the different sections, so that I have a view of what I'm going to do and can see the logic of it. Am I covering both bases here? Am I covering what if it's there? What if it's not? What should I do if it's not there? What should I do if it's there? Then I got that in plain language that I can read. But let's say if it's there, we need to remove it. And how do we remove it? Well, we find it first, and then we use remove child afterwards, right? Like we learned in the previous lesson. So if we find it, let's dark CSS link be equal to document query selector. And we'll find it again here. Dark mode CSS link. So now the variable dark CSS link is the element, right? So we need to remove that element. So we can find it by saying document head, because it's a child element of head. So we can just find the head of the HTML DOM, and we can say remove child from there. Dark CSS link was the name of the variable. So now we're actually finding the element, and we are saying I want to remove that element from the HTML DOM head section. Okay, that's if we want to remove it. That's if we find the link to dark mode CSS. What if we don't find the link to dark mode CSS? Then we want to add a link to dark mode CSS instead. And we do this by using create element, as we did in the previous lesson. So we'll start to create this element, a link, and add some attributes to it. We want to add the attribute of href, which file should it be using, the rel attribute, which is style sheet, the type attribute, which is text CSS, and the ID that we need to find it through the dark mode CSS link ID. We want to add those, and then we want to append it to head in the HTML DOM. So let's try that out. So we say I'm just gonna call the variable dark style, and we'll say document create element, and a CSS inserted into head is a link, as you can see here. So we'll do that. We'll make that the element type here. Create element link. And right now it has not been inserted to the DOM because we haven't used child append or append child or anything yet. We're just creating the element in memory. We're not putting it into the HTML DOM. We have to add some more stuff to it first. So we'll say darkstyle .href. We need to add the URL that it should contain in the href attribute, and that is assets /css /darkmode.css. Remember that it is assets with a plural s, so assets /css /darkmode. That's the file itself. Then we need to add some more. We need rel, and that is a style sheet. Let's check our index here. You can see we have rel style sheet and we have type text CSS. We need that as well. Darkstyle.type, set that to be equal to text CSS. And darkstyle, we need to add the ID as well, and that's just .id. Set that to be equal to, and it is this one down here, so let's add that. And if I click here, all of my references should light up, so I'm certain that they are spelled correctly. Let's see what happens if I miss something here. Then this one doesn't light up, so it's a good way of checking fast to see if you've spelled everything correctly. So we've got the element now. The element has the type link, and it's got an href, which is this path. It's got a relation, which is style sheet. It's got a type, which is text CSS. It's got an ID, and now we need to add it to the head of the document. So we say document.head append child darkstyle. Alright, so now we've actually got a toggle mode that should work. Let's see if that works. If I go out here and I reload, I can go darkModeToggle here, and that just shows me whatever's the content of the function. If I use the parenthesis, it should toggle the dark mode. It does. And if I do it again, it toggles it back. Okay, good. Yeah, let's bind the event to the add the event listener to the button at the end of the page here, and then I'll let you type in and check that it works. So to add the event listener, we use the usual document query selector, and we find the button itself. Let's see, it's got an ID of some sort. Button mode, that's it. So hashtag button mode, since it's an ID, and we want to add an event listener to it. And that event listener is click. And we want to add a function to that event, so when it happens, let me just clear this up a bit. Function, and I'll add event as a parameter. This means that we can cancel the standard thing that happens when you click on it, which is kind of nice. So the event itself, when we click on it, is actually inside of this variable. You can output it to console if you want to check what actually is inside of that event. But let's see, the first thing I want to do is I want to prevent it from getting this annoying hashtag when I click on it. So when I click on toggle dark mode, you can see there will be a hashtag that shows up here. Yeah, this one. And that also means that the page will scroll to the top whenever I click on the button, which I don't want. So let's remove that, and we can do that by saying whatever normally happens when I do this event should not happen. Okay, and you can do this by saying event.preventDefault. And that's a method inside of JavaScript that you can use. And let's see if that works first. So I have reloaded the page, and I click on toggle dark mode, and as you can see, I click, but I don't get the hashtag, so I don't get sent straight to the top of the page. And then I want to toggle my dark mode, and the simple way of doing that is now darkModeToggle, and we just call that function because it knows if it should turn it off or on. So we'll just call the function every time you click on the button. Let's see if that works. Toggle dark mode, toggle dark mode. That works, and you can see in the DOM up here that head lights up when I click on it. This means that something has changed inside of the head tag. If I fold this out and I toggle dark mode, you can see that I am adding and removing this link here. Okay. Yes. Type this in. Pause the video, type this in, and make sure that it works. If something is not right, then output it to console and see what happens, or do some tests. Use alerts to see what happens if you go this way or that way in the if sentence, if that's an issue. But go ahead and type it in. The next thing we need to look at is what happens, or how can we actually read style properties of an element in JavaScript. Let's check that out. Let's try reading some values from an element. We've got let's see, we've got the hero element here somewhere out here. Hero, yes, we've got this div with the class hero. Let's see if we can read some properties from that, and we'll find the element first. So I'm gonna say let element hero be equal to document.query selector, and this is a class name, so I'm gonna go for all, and use hero as a class name. So that's my CSS selector, that's .hero, and this actually returns an array, right? The array might just contain of one item, but it's still an array. Let's try to console log this element hero and see what's inside of it. Not there, okay. As you can see, we've got a node list, it says, and that node list consists of one item called div.hero, which is in index 0. And if I fold this out, you can see there's some stuff here, and there's even a style style parameter, style property, that's the name, a style property for it, and as you can see, there's some inner text, outer text, different values, that's set. Yeah, alright. So let's just find this single one, and it was index 0, so we can instead of looking for the entire array, we can look for this element in the array. So I'll just take the first element, which was the only element, by the way, and I'll put that. So let's see what happens. So now I'm getting the div class hero instead of the list of items from the array. And if I add .style, I will get the same list of CSS thingies, right? And this is actually a list where you can, you can change stuff by finding the different. Let's see. Let's find a property we want to change. Well, we're looking at hero. Is there background image or something we can remove? Background image, yeah. And as you can see, it's not showing anything, and I am not sure if it's because the element hasn't been styled yet at this time or whatever happens, but let's see, background image, set that to be equal to, and I can't do that inside of the console log, is equal to, this should give an error and of some sort. Background image URL. No, that's not how that's written. Yeah, there we go. So now the background image URL is ASD, SA, whatever, which is an image that doesn't exist. So, and as you can see, the style has been replaced inside of the element. So we've actually added a style attribute with whatever information we put in there. So that's how you can change read, and well, you couldn't actually read it, but you can read which properties are available, and you can set those properties in here. You can try that out now and see if you can get that to work. You should overwrite with nothing in the background for the hero image if this works. But let's get rid of this. And let's try to use the second button that we got at the end here. This one, toggle button color. I'm gonna change the button itself. I'm gonna change some colors and set a border for the button when you press it. So let's try that out. So I am gonna use a sort of a is the button changed or not Boolean variable that is global to make me able to check if I should set it or remove those different properties that I'm setting. And I'm gonna call it button color is active because that makes perfect sense to me. And for now it is false. We start out with the false mode. Button color has not been activated yet. I haven't pressed it as a user. As soon as I press it, I'm gonna set this to true and change some colors. Okay. So we are going to do some. Let me first bind an event listener to the button so that we can check if stuff works. So let's do that. Document query select r. The button's name was button color, and that is with a hashtag. Document query selector button color, and we need to add an event listener, and I want to add the click event, and I want to add a function to that event, and I want the event as a parameter so that I can tell it to not do what it usually does using the event prevent default. So event.prevent default, which turns off the usual function of whatever happens when you click on that link. And then I am going to say, I'm going to call on a function that I'm going to write in just a second called button color. Nope. Button color. Thank you. Press escape to avoid that. And I want to do something here. I want to pass the element that is clicked on as a parameter. So when I click on the button, I am passing the button itself as a parameter to the function button color, and I can do this by adding this to the call for the function in the parameter place. This means that this is now the button that I'm clicking on. Okay, it's transferring that element to the button color function in a second. So when I create my function here called button color, I'm getting the element as a parameter, and I'll just call that parameter element. So the button that I'm clicking on is now inside of this element variable that I get passed as a parameter. Let's try to see how that works. If I console log this, and I console log element, then let's see what happens. Reload, and you can see I'm console logging the button itself, button color. So that seems to work. But that's not our plan. I want to check if my button color is active. Let me move this down here so that it makes more sense. So I've got my button colors active variable here that is either true or false. In this case it is false. So I'm first gonna check if button color is active, which it isn't, because it's currently false. So whatever happens in here is I want to remove the background color from the button. So let's try that. So I'm saying element, which is the one that we have gotten passed here as a parameter, right? I'm gonna change something on the style for that. I'm gonna say style dot background color. And please note that in direct opposition to normal CSS, you don't use a dash and a lowercase c. You use no dash and an uppercase c here. And that's how we write these put together properties in CSS, is by using camel case in JavaScript. So we have element, we set the style, and we set the specific background color style of being nothing. And that is if button color is active. So this variable needs to be true for that to happen, and it's not true now. So what happens if it's not true now? Well, then we need to add some extra style to the button, because that was kind of the purpose of the whole thing. So I am setting element dot style dot something, and I'm gonna do this 5 times, so I'm just gonna copy this. So I'm gonna say element.style.background color, and I'm gonna set that to be equal to an RGBA value, RGBA, which stands for red, green, blue, and alpha, which is transparency. And I'm gonna set it to 0, which is no color for red, 0, no color for green, 0, no color for blue, so that's black. And I'm gonna set the transparency to 0.7. Alright, and I am going to add a border color as well. Border color. And I'm setting that as a hexadecimal value. So that's a hashtag before it. And the value is, again, it's RGB divided. So the first value is 0. The second value is FF, which is the same as a top value. You can't get any bigger with the hexadecimal values. That's 255 in normal numbers. And FF again, which is 255 in normal numbers. And this is divided in the same way as RGB, right? So this is red, green, blue. So we have maximum green, maximum blue, no red. Maximum green, maximum blue. Is that teal? I don't know. Let's see. And I want to set a border width. Border width of 2 pixels. And I want to set a border style of solid. And I want to set a color, not border color, but just color of yellow, which means the text in the button should be yellow. Okay, so what I need to do now is I basically need to flip this variable around and say, well, if it was false before, it needs to be true now, and if it was true before, it needs to be false now. And you can do this by using a nifty trick. You can see button color is active, that's the name of the variable. I'm setting that to be equal. The value of that variable I am setting to be equal to the opposite of its own value. So I'm just flipping it now. So if it was true, it is now equal to false. If it was false, it is now equal to true. And I'm doing this every time the function runs, because I just want to flip that around. All right. Let's see if all of this works and see what happens. Reloading the page. Toggle button color. There's an error. Element is not defined. Okay, let's see what happens. Script, element, style, background, color. Okay. Okay. So this should have been the element and not button colors active. So let's correct that, because that's the name of the variable that I'm choosing to use here. Let's try that again. There we go. So now it switches it turns the background color on and off, right? And I'm adding some style to it. You can see it grows slightly bigger because the border is added, so it's 4 pixels higher than what it was before and 4 pixels wider. And if we look at the element itself, you can see that what happens is that it adds a style attribute that sets all of the values: background color, border color, and border width, border style, and color. Try this yourselves and check that it works. Pause the video and do that now. What happens if we replace the element style itself, so the attribute? Let's see if I add something in here. Element style, set that to be equal to, well, let's just let's change the color again. Color yellow. What do you think will happen here? Give it a second, think about it, and then let's test it out. Okay, let's see. I'm toggling. Alright, so what happened? Only thing that changed was the text. The thing is that I'm changing all of these different elements here. Sorry, parameters inside of the style tag. I'm changing background color, I'm changing border color, I'm changing border width, I'm changing border style, and I'm changing color. And then I go and override the whole thing by saying, well, the style attribute should just be color yellow. So I'm removing everything and just replacing it with color yellow. That's what's happening. So let's not do that. Yeah. Okay, and that's it for this part. Feel free to test out the thing with the element style color yellow if you want to. Otherwise, let's just move on to the next part. We need to move on to the next part, which is some colors and shapes that I have created. Let's close this part up by closing the files themselves. You can use Control-B or Command-B to open the side panel. And open the colors shapes folder instead. We need the index.html, and we need a script file, and we need some CSS as well, a style file. I am closing the side panel again using Control-B or Command-B on a Mac. As you can see in the style sheet, we've got some different stuff here, which is pretty standard for what I'm doing. And then we've got a class called box, which is taking 85 view width and dividing it by 10. So we have a tenth of 85 view width as a width and a height for box. And then I'm saying, okay, if there's an element with the class name box and it has a div as a direct child, then I'm setting a transition for it. Then I'm creating some color selectors here. I have red, purple, blue, teal, green, chartreuse, yellow, orange, and I have basically set border color to the same as the name and background color to the same as the name. And that goes for all of them. So I've got 8 different colors here. And then I've got 3 different shapes. I've got a class called square. I've got a class called circle, which is the same as square but with a border radius of 50. And then I've got diamond, which is a transformed rotated 45 degrees box. So we basically have a square that has been rotated 45 degrees and has been made smaller and has a margin of 15%, which means that it will fit inside of the space that is set for it. And I'm gonna use this box class on a lot of different boxes that contains divs that gets one of the colors and one of the shapes attached to them. So I'm gonna have a lot of boxes. I'm gonna have 10 boxes on a row, and inside of those boxes I'm gonna have one div. Inside of each of those boxes I'm gonna have one div with a color class attached to it and a shape class attached to it. That's the purpose of this thing. Let's have a quick look at the index.html file. We have the usual stuff up here, and then we have the body tag, main tag, article tag, and a headline, colors and shapes. And I've got 2 buttons, generateShapes, changeFigures, and I've got a single div down here called output, ID output. And let's see what we get when we look at this. So we get this yeah, let's not have that. Let's have this instead. So we get these 2 buttons, generate items and change figures. So let's get creative with this. First of all, I want to have two arrays that contains all of my shapes and my colors, right? I want an array for shapes, which are square, circle, and diamond, and I want an array of colors, which are red, purple, etc. So let's create those first. So I'm gonna say let shapes be equal to, and I can just create an array by adding the values to it directly. So I'm actually initializing it. Square, comma, circle, and if you forget to add your quotation marks, you can just highlight the thing you want to have quotation marks around and add quotation marks like that. Circle, diamond. Those are the three shapes we've got in our CSS. Let's have the different values for the colors as well. Let's see if I can do this in a clever way. So I've got all of these lines here, and I just want the single words. I can remove those, and I can remove that. And what do I want to do? I want to remove these extra tabs. And there we go. And I want to have all of these selected. And what do I want to do? I want them in quotation marks, and I want a comma and a space between them, and I want them in a line. So I can do it like this. Let colors be equal to, alright, so now I've got my two arrays with shapes and colors. These are outside of any functions. They are in the root of our JavaScript file, so they will be available to any functions that we create inside of our JavaScript file, which is important because we're going to use them in different functions. Let's add some event listeners to the two buttons, but first let's do that right away. So document query selector, and the first button is called generateShapes. GenerateShapes, add event listener, and that's a click. Oh, I'm missing this one. Parentheses, click, and it's a function. No, it's not a function I want to run. Yes, it is, but it's not a function that's supposed to be in here. It's calling a function, generateShapes, and here we don't have the parentheses here because I want to. When you call on a function in this way, where you would normally have a function that you write, then you don't use the parentheses, because then it's inserting the content of the function and not whatever it is that it calculates its way to, right? So it's actually inserting the code instead of the result when we do it like this. We need to add one for changeFigures as well. I think that's called, yes, changeFigures. And we'll call that function the same thing. So, okay. And these two functions don't exist yet. So let's just create those so that we have them. Function changeFigures and function generateShapes. There we go. And we can have it console log This way, when I click on them, I should get a console log that tells me the name of whatever I clicked on. Generate shapes, generate figures. Good. All right, we're good. Do this. Make sure that it works. So pause the video and do that. Good. Let's get on with it. So if we want to generate some shapes, we want to have some shapes and colors. We want to do that inside of the output div here. And we wanted to output, for each shape we wanted to output a div with the class name box, and inside of that div is a new div with a random color and a random shape. Okay, so let's try that out here. And I want to generate 60 of them, so I'm gonna say let amount be equal to 60. This is an easy way of being able to change that later on. And to do this, I'm gonna use a for loop. So I'm gonna basically say for let I be equal to 0, which is our starting point. As long as I is lesser than amount, which is our 60 here, then we keep going, and for each iteration I'm adding 1 to I. So now I'm counting to 60, and I'm using I as my counter, right? But what we need to do is we need to create a new element called of the type div, and we need to give it a class name with of box first, and then we'll create an element of the type div and find a random color and a random shape attached to that, and then we'll attach that div to the box div, and then we will attach the whole thing to our output div in HTML. Let's try that out. So first of all, let box be equal to document create element, and it's an element of the type div. So that creates the div that we want our figure to be inside the box div here, and we need to attach the class to it. So we say box class list dot add, and we add box as a class name. So now we have an element called box. It's not in HTML DOM yet, it's only in our browser memory. Of course the HTML DOM is also in browser memory, but it's a different part of it. So we haven't attached it to the HTML yet. We'll do that later. But first of all, before we do that, we need to create a new div with the figure inside of it and put that inside of this div. So let's create a variable called figure, which is a new element, document create element of the type div again. And this div, we need to add a random shape and a random color to it. But how do we do that? First of all, let's just try to add a shape and a color by writing it, right? So we'll do the randomness afterwards. So figure class list dot add, and let's put in red for all of them, and we'll do the same with the shape. Let's put a circle for all of them. So we should now have 60 red circles when we're done with this, but let's keep going for now. And we need to append this figure to the element box, right? So we go box dot append child figure. Oh, that shouldn't be in quotation marks, figure, because we are adding the variable and not a string. So now we have added this part here, this part. We've added that to our box that we created. And now we need to add the box to our output div, which is the one out here in HTML. So we are saying document, let's find that output div first. Query select and the div had an ID of output, so let's add that output, and we append child, and in this case it's the box element that we want to append. So let's do that. And now we're doing this 60 times, right? So we should have 60 reds. Well, it's not circles, it's actually disks because they are filled out. But we should have that when we look at our HTML. Let's see. Computer says no. Did I not save? You know what? I should click the button for that to happen, right? Yeah. Let's generate items. Boom. Okay, so now we've got a lot of red circles, which are fine, but we want some variance into this. So let's see. We have the class list add red and class list add circle. We should make those random instead. How do we get something random from these arrays? Well, let's check that out first here. So if I want to be able to enter any array into a function and say, give me one random item from this array, I could either you know, create a different function for each array I have, or I can create a unified function which can, you know, takes the array as a parameter and then just returns one random item from that array as text. So let's try doing that. So function random from array is what I'm calling this one, and what I'm handing this function as a parameter is an array. So I'll be saying random from array shapes, random from array colors. I'll just call the parameter ARR for array here. And now what I want to do is I want to pick a random item from the array and return that. And how do I know how many items are in an array? I can check the length of the array. Let's say console log arr.length, right? Not r, arr. Okay. And if I call the random from array function with a array name inside of it, I should now get the length of it. Let's see. Random from array, and let's say colors. I get the length of the array here, 8, right? And that matches with the amount of colors, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're good. What if I add shapes? Is that the name of it? Yeah, shapes. I get 3, and we have 3 shapes, so we're good. Length is working, but that makes sure that I can check on I can use the length of the array. I can figure out what the top value could be from this random number that I want to drag out. And how do we get random numbers in JavaScript? Let's try this out. If I go out here and I say math.random, it's showing me some stuff here, right? And every time, you can see that every time I do this, it gives out a new number, 0 point something, right? And a lot of decimals. But I don't want a number between 0 and 1. I want a natural number between 0 and the length minus 1 of our you know, of the array that we inputted. But if I times a math random by something, let's say I times it by 10, you can see now it turns, it changes. It now is above 1, first of all. Let's see how many, if I do this again, math.random. I need an h times 10. I'm just going to copy this. You see, now it's 4. Now it's actually 7, 1, 5, 6, 8. All right, so far so good. But I don't want the decimal points. I can remove the decimal points by using a method called mathFlore, which just cuts them off. Right? It's the same as rounding down every time. So let's try this. I'm saying math.floor parentheses, and then I'm adding the whole thing into parentheses here. So if I do this, I get a random number between 0 and 9, including those two. Right? So this is a way of creating a random number, and instead of 10, I can use the length of the array. So let's check this out. So I want to get a random index from the array that I input. So let random index be equal to, let me copy this whole thing. We've got mathFlore with mathRandom times how the length of it's not the top value, it's one above the top value, which is the same as the length in this case, because the array length is one above what we actually want to accept, because we start with 0 and not 1. So I'm just gonna put array length here instead of 10. So now we've got a random index based on the length of the array that we're inputting, which is pretty nice. And now all we need to do is we need to return something. We need to return a value from the array, and we can do this quite easily by saying, well, the array and square brackets. As you know, usually we can use 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in here with the index. We just use random index instead. So now we're actually returning a string with the value from a random item in the array. Okay, let's see if that works. Let's go out here, reload, and I will say randomFromArray, and I want to pick colors: purple, green, yellow, teal, orange, green, purple, red. All right. What about shapes? Diamond, circle, circle, square, diamond, diamonds. So this is actually working quite fine. So I can input any array I want and get a random item from that array, which is pretty nice. So up here we had our figure class add red and circle. Well, let's just input a random item from the colors here. So we can say random from array, and we don't need quotation marks because it's a variable. And let's go from shapes. Oh, colors first. Colors, yeah. The order doesn't matter, but I might as well do it proper here. Random from array colors, and down here. Oh, let's see our random colors show up when we click here. Generate items. So now we've got all of these different colors. If you can, let's see here. We've got purple circle, teal circle, purple circle, blue circle, red circle, etc. Now we just need to change up the shapes as well. So we'll do the same thing, random from array, and replace this circle thingy and just say shapes instead. See what happens when we push generate items. And if I press it again, it just adds 60 every time. We get 60 more. We get 60 more. We get 60 more. If you want to, you can have it replace whatever was there before. by saying, well, I want to clear the output element first. Let's try that out, see what happens. Queries document query selector output inner HTML is equal to nothing. That'll clear it out every time. So we get 60 new shapes instead of adding 60 shapes. Okay, and if you want more than 60, you can just change this number. Let's say 80. Reload, we got 80 instead. Okay, you should type this in and make sure that it works. Remember to use console log to figure out if stuff blows up, why stuff blows up, if there are any trouble. Please pause the video and do that now. Let's try to change the shapes by having the changeFigures here. Let's have that replace all of the random classes on the different shapes with other random classes. You can we're going to write a function called change. Oh, we've got changeFigures down here, so we're not going to write a new one. Let's not do that. So what we want to do is we want to find all of the diffs that are inside diffs with the class name box. Let's see. You can see all of the box diffs here has a div inside of them. And if we look for div.box and find any direct children that are of the element type div, then we're finding each of these ones who has the colors and the shapes as class names. So let's do that first. Let figures be equal to document query selector, and we just use regular CSS selectors here. So div.box, that's all of our divs with the class name box, who has a direct child of the type div. So now we're finding each of these divs here, right? These ones. So any div that resides as a direct child of a div with the class name box, those are the ones that we're finding here. And we can try to console log this just to see what happens. Console log figures. And we need to press changeFigures first, and now it will be nothing. Let's generate some items and press changeFigures. We should have green square. And I am using the wrong one. I should use query selector all, not just query selector. Let's try that again. Generate items, changeFigures. Okay, now good. Now we've got a node list of 80 nodes, which are all of our items here, right? You can see that. And it's not the box around, it's the item themselves. It's the div with yellow circle, it's the div with chartreuse square, etc. Okay, do this and make sure that it works before you step ahead. Alright, so we've got all of our figures here. Let's change them. And to do this, we can either use a for loop or we can use a for each. And this time I want to use a for each. So I'm gonna use figures.for each, and that's with a capital E, uppercase E. And you basically have parentheses around this. And the first thing we need to do is we need to get the element that we're at right now in our for each loop, and we can do this by saying, well, it's actually part of the of the parameters for this function. It's an anonymous arrow function that we're doing now. It's all using equal larger than as a way of setting it to say, okay, this is an anonymous arrow function, which kind of lies in the sign here. And what we can do now is, if we do something in here, some code here, and we use element, then we one by one do something to each of the elements that are in the code. So let's try stripping them of their class names first. So any class that has been attached to them should be removed now. So let's try that. So element dot class name, we set that to be equal to nothing, an empty string. Let's try that out first. So when we click on the changeFigures button, we should have a lot of, nothing on the page, because they should have all of their classes removed. Yeah, we got that. As you can see, the boxes are still there, but they haven't got any classes attached to them inside of them. So that's an empty class attribute. Okay, that's step one. Now we want to replace whatever was in there with some new random stuff. So let's say element dot class list dot add, and again we can use random from array again, and we just attach a shape from shapes, and we attach a color from colors, and let's see if that works. Generate items, change figures. There we go. That looks pretty neat. Okay. So type this in, make sure that it works, and then I'll show you a trick of how to get this to auto-generate and do a lot of stuff. Okay, let's play around with this. If I want to have it, when I load the page, I want it to generate shapes to begin with. We can just call on the function called generateShapes, because that's what the button is doing. So let's do that down here, generateShapes. Now it should generate shapes as soon as we enter the page. Let's reload. Poof, we've got some shapes. If I press it again, it will just replace them, right? Like it would before. It's emptying out the output diff and generating 80 new ones. But let's say we wanted to do the changeFigures by itself every second or so. How can we do that? We can use a way of that called setInterval in JavaScript. And how you usually do that is you attach that to a variable so that you can kill that interval again later on. So you I'm gonna call it my interval. It doesn't matter what name it is. It could be x or blah. And I am going to use the method setInterval, and then you tell it what to do and how often to do it. I wanted to change figures. I wanted to use this function here, change figures, and I wanted to do every second. And the way I put this in is I put in how many milliseconds should be between every time it does this. So now for every 1000 milliseconds, which is the same as a second, it will activate the changeFigures function. It will actually run the code as if this code was inside of here. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay. Try that out, play around with it. You can you can actually look up on W3 schools to see how you choke a setInterval again by using the variable name. See if you can figure that out and tell me about it during the lesson. Alright, play around with it, and I will see you at the lesson. Have fun, and see you guys.